Good morning. My name is Mary Collins, and I am the curator of the Scott Family Collection here at Alamance Community College. Your instructor, Mr. Lucas, asked me to talk to you today about some local history. This is a bust or head of Robert Walter Scott, who served as governor of North Carolina from 1969 to 1973. I see this sculpture every day. It is located right outside my office at the Scott Family Collection. The Scott Family Collection is part of the library here at ACC and is located in room 316 of the G Building. We are right across the hall from the library. Governor Bob, as he was called, is about as local as you can get. He was born in 1929, a few miles from here, and grew up on his father's dairy farm. He liked to joke that he was born in a log cabin, but this was only partly true. His parents' house did include part of a log cabin that was moved to their property and formed the basis for their house. In case you didn't know, this campus of ACC is called the Carrington Scott Campus. It was named for Governor Bob and his Aunt Elizabeth, who donated 48 acres of their land so that ACC could expand. Bob came from a long line of dairy farmers who were active in public service. His father, Carr Scott, was a dairy farmer who served as Commissioner of Agriculture, Governor, followed by a seat in the United States Senate. Bob's uncle Ralph, this would be Carr's brother, started Melville Dairy and spent decades in the North Carolina State Assembly. Bob's grandfather, Farmer Bob as he was called, ran a dairy farm and served in the North Carolina Assembly as both a representative and as a senator, but of course not at the same time. And even Bob's great-grandfather was a farmer and businessman who was active in his community. Bob was the youngest of 3 children. Here we see him with his family, his dad Carr, his mother Mary, his older brother Osborne, and his older sister Mary Carr. A lot of people assumed that Bob learned dairy farming and politics at his father's knee. This would be a natural assumption, but it was not actually the case. In interviews later in life, Bob would explain that while he loved and respected his father, they were not close. Carr was away from home a lot during Bob's childhood. Bob was closer to his mother, Mary White Scott, and he learned about dairy farming from his father's manager, Cecil Johnson. This was not unusual back then. The mother was expected to raise the children and to take care of the home and the family finances, while the father earned a living. As the family business expanded, Mary took on more and more responsibility for the day-to-day operation. When Bob went off to Duke University after high school, his first thought was to become a doctor like his Uncle Floyd. He soon found out that his prior schooling was not adequate in the sciences, and he had trouble keeping up. He transferred to NC State and graduated with a degree in agriculture in 1952. By this time, he was married. He was drafted in 1953 and spent the next 2 years in the Army. He returned home to the farm in 1955, and he and his wife Jessie Ray started their family. And this is how things stood in 1958 when Carr died suddenly on a trip home from Washington. So Carr never got to see his son's career in politics, but Bob's mother did, and she was always a loyal supporter and advisor, having seen politics from the inside out. Bob was only 29 at this time, but with Carr gone, there was speculation that Bob might carry on the family tradition and run for public office. But he didn't. Instead, he continued farming, but also took a job with the North Carolina Grange, an organization that supported and advocated for farmers and agriculture. The job took him all around the state, and especially to Raleigh, where he kept up with bills of interest to the Grange organization. Bob said in an interview one time that if his father had not died suddenly in 1958 at the age of 61, he might not have entered politics at all. Carr and Ralph were political powerhouses, and there might not be a place for Bob in public life. And Bob felt this way until 1963, when he saw some newspaper articles speculating that he might make a good candidate for governor. Now, most people who decide to run for public office start small. They run for school board or county commissioner, not the top job in the state. But Bob felt encouraged by what he read in the newspapers. He decided to take some time to travel around North Carolina. He talked to a lot of people, and he discovered that there was a lot of support for him, but not enough to run for governor. So he ran for lieutenant governor instead, and he did win. What does the lieutenant governor do? The Constitution of North Carolina designates the lieutenant governor as the president of the state senate and a member of the state board of education. But this is essentially a part-time job with limited duties. Generally speaking, the lieutenant governor gets to spend 4 years trying to plan for their next move, which in Bob's case was a run for governor. He did travel around the state quite a lot, giving speeches, becoming known, and gathering support. Bob ran for governor and was elected in November of 1968. He was 39 years old at the time. One thing he figured out pretty quick is that the North Carolina that elected his father no longer existed. Things had changed. The people who voted for Carr Scott in 1948 wanted the government to help them. They wanted better schools, paved roads, and electricity. Lots of electricity. By the time Bob entered politics, the voters wanted their government to stop interfering in their lives. A lot of this had to do with the end of racial segregation and the beginning of integration. People came down on both sides of this issue. Some liked things the way they were, and others were in favor of change. So as Governor Bob was trying to achieve his goals for North Carolina, he had a lot of distractions. But let's talk about the goals first. One of Bob's most significant accomplishments during his time as governor was to change the way higher education in North Carolina was organized. When he took office as governor in 1969, the UNC system had two major organizations. One was the three-college system consisting of UNC in Chapel Hill, UNC in Greensboro, and NC State in Raleigh. All of the other state-funded colleges and universities were lumped together under a state board of education. So these two organizations, the UNC system and the State Board of Education, felt that they were in competition with each other for prestige, attention, and funds. And of course, they were. After a long campaign, Governor Scott convinced the legislature to create the University of North Carolina system, which is made up of 17 institutions, 16 colleges or universities, and the School of Science and Math. The 17 schools are managed by a board of governors. Each institution has its own board of trustees and a chancellor. The system as a whole is led by a president. And this is how things stand to this day. Number 2, Governor Bob also started a push to reorganize the administrative departments of North Carolina. When he took office, there were 317 administrative units reporting directly to the governor. That is a lot of reports. A constitutional amendment was approved by the voters to reduce the number of state administrative departments to 25. And 3, he started a state-funded kindergarten program by levying a tax on tobacco products. This was not a popular move, I can tell you. Before this, North Carolina was one of only a few states that did not offer free kindergarten. If people wanted their children to attend kindergarten, they would have to find a private school and pay tuition. Bob was proud of his time as governor, but he had some regrets. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of his time in office was taken up dealing with very unhappy people. Here are some examples. During the first 6 months in office, he called out the National Guard 9 times to deal with civil unrest, mostly race-related. In the interest of time, I have isolated 3 of these incidents to give you an idea of what was going on. There are plenty more, but this will give you the idea. First, a food workers' strike at UNC in Chapel Hill caused a lot of disruption on campus, with many students, both black and white, siding with the workers who were mostly black. The workers were seeking better pay and better working conditions. Various law enforcement groups were sent to campus, including the police and the state troopers. The National Guard was called up, but did not actually enter campus at this time. Second, an incident at a local all-black high school in Greensboro spilled onto the campus of North Carolina A&T. The incident had to do with the election of a write-in candidate for student council. The write-in candidate won the election, but was denied office by the school authorities as he was thought to be in contact with radical groups outside of the school. What ensued was an out-and-out riot with gunfire, tear gas, and vandalism. So here's our third example. Governor Scott called the National Guard to assist in Wilmington when unhappiness regarding both desegregation and integration, also at a local high school, erupted into violence in the town. This case had to do with a very successful black vocational high school that was being closed. The staff were let go, and the students were distributed to other schools to achieve racial integration. Violence erupted in the streets of Wilmington, with a number of businesses being burned to the ground. 10 people were sent to prison in the early 1970s for arson. These 10 people became known as the Wilmington 10. I didn't know much about any of this before I moved to North Carolina, but in 1993 I was working at Duke University when Ben Chavis, one of the Wilmington 10, was named head of the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. By this point, Mr. Chavis was an ordained minister and activist, and the news services mentioned that he was a graduate of Duke Divinity School. So I got a lot of phone calls asking to verify that, in fact, he did get that degree. Well, it turns out that Ben, or as he's now called, the Reverend Dr. Ben Chavis, was a student at Duke while still incarcerated. He had asked the prison system to move him to a facility in Hillsborough, so he was within driving distance of his degree program. Obviously, the prison van dropped him off and picked him up outside of the chapel. If you want to know more about this time in North Carolina history, use the search term Wilmington 10. I am just telling you about this from the standpoint of Governor Scott, but there is a lot more to this story. Bob's term as governor ended in January of 1973. By law at that time, Bob could only serve one term as governor, so by 1973 he was in his early 40s and looking for a job. He took several jobs and then in 1983 became the president of the Community College system for North Carolina. During this time, he worked to align the courses taught by each community college so that they could be transferred from one school to another. Also, he worked to allow for students to transfer courses from the community colleges to four-year colleges and universities. This work is ongoing. I met the president of UNC Wilmington a few years ago when he came here to set up some agreements between ACC and UNCW. Governor Bob was also very concerned with literacy. He found out that bank tellers knew which of their customers could not read or write, and he set up a program where banks could help people enroll in literacy courses at community colleges. Bob retired from the community college system in 1994. He said things were going well and it was time to bow out. He admitted that he was tired and his health was not what it had been when he was younger. He enjoyed being retired and spending more time with his family, and he was given a number of awards and medals after he retired and gave quite a few interviews, so we have a sense of what he thought about his life and career. Governor Bob passed away in 2009 and was buried with his ancestors in the cemetery at Hawfields Presbyterian Church. So this is how Governor Bob wanted to be remembered. This is what is carved on his tombstone and his wife's tombstone. So do we have any questions? So these are three sources that I think you will find very useful if you want to find out a little bit more about Governor Scott. There's plenty of material out there, but this will give you something to start with.